Wonderful.
Yeah,
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. Really, really appreciate it. I'll hand straight over to you. We're going to be talking all about empathy today, aren't we?
we are. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for that, Leo. Nice to be here. Um, this is a topic that seems to be buzzing around the industry quite a lot at the moment. So um, I am kind of continuing with a kind of narrative that we started earlier this year with Liz at Develop, Liz Prince, and this is a sort of continuation of that journey. So keep watching for more. There's loads more coming up. But today we're going to sort of talk about sort of what empathy is within your teams and sort of a little bit of understanding about how it helps you have better relationships at work. We're going to dive into a little bit more about kind of what empathy actually is. So lots of people sort of see it as just sort of one binary thing, but we're going to go into kind of a little bit more detail about that, different perspectives on it. So sort of why it might be different for different personality types and different sort of divergent types as well. Obviously explore a little bit about kind of where it kind of when it lacks, what that looks like, and how that can kind of create something, the toxicity that we may or may not know. And then an open discussion. We're going to get you to do some work for us. So you don't have to do that vocally. You can join in on the chat, and Paul's going to monitor the chat. But if you've got questions, then do feel free to put them into the chat. Or if you'd rather not put them with your name against it, that's absolutely fine. We have no problem with that. Put them into the Q&A if you want to be anonymous. Again, Paul will read them out to me as we get to that point. But there are some discussion points, so I do want you to join in, and I do want you to start kind of having, sharing some thoughts with us about some questions we're going to ask you. And right at the end of it, we're going to give you some reflections and things to take away from today. So you've got some sort of thoughts to some provocations, let's say, put it that way, and some ideas about how you can improve your empathy and how you can build better empathy. So that's quite a lot to cover, and I've got 55 minutes to get quite a big topic in. So I'm going to start sort of waffling about the intro and dive straight in. And hopefully, if you have any comments, you can share them with us. Right, this is where the internet fails me and I'm not good. Wait, I did it. Brilliant. Okay, so why does empathy matter? I'm sure you've all got thoughts about this, and I'm sure you've all got experiences of this. Beyond the kind of it's a nice way to behave with people, it's also a strategic edge. So it's also kind of better for your teams, it's better for relationships, and it helps you foster deeper relationships. But empathy is about sort of understanding before acting. So in Fresh Seed, we talk with our clients about this quite a lot. We sort of say, reflect before you respond. So try and slow down your action. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. It also supports psychological safety. Give me a thumbs up or a reaction somewhere if you know what psychological safety is. Psychological safety leads to better creativity and better retention, better team dynamics. Great, nice to see some thumbs up and hearts. Great. Obviously, it's the engine to inclusive design and sustainable culture. You may sort of think, oh, hang on a second, I'm just teaching you to suck eggs here. But empathy is the bit where you can step back off that shelf a little bit and take less judgment of things, less quick, that back to that less quick reactions, and really understand without judgment what's going on. And that's how we get more inclusive design, more inclusive cultures, and more sustainable cultures across retention. Obviously, it also reduces burnout and disengagement. So if we're listening to people, if we're kinder to people, we're less judgmental, and we're understanding, hang on a second, something's not quite right here, and we're recognizing those patterns, we're going to help people. We're going to be able to help people. And that's not always about us creating a solution. That's about us listening and understanding, oh, you're struggling today, or you're struggling this week, or the workload's too much and there's a problem, and we need to solve that more holistically as an organisation. So that's why it matters. But who knew that there were 3 different types of empathy? Give me a reaction if you knew if you knew this. Give me a thumbs up or a heart if you knew this. Okay, so a couple, good. Give me a thumbs down or sort of a whatever reaction is appropriate to say you didn't know this. This was really unusual for you or news for you. If you do know this, absolutely brilliant, because thank you. I like the wow, because you know, great, well done for understanding it, but not everyone does. And this is where I think it's really important, because this is where we're getting into the nuance and the detail of what empathy is. So for those of you who do know, apologies, I'm repeating myself. For those of you who don't, cognitive empathy is the bit where you understand what other people are thinking and feeling. So most of us have a cognitive empathy, so we understand that people have sort of thoughts and feelings about things, and we can sort of in an intellectualizing kind of way, if intellectualizing is a word, we can understand that other people have different perspectives on it, on situations. Then we move on to emotional empathy, and emotional empathy is that bit where we understand what we feel and therefore how other people might feel. So we might recognize that in a situation where I don't know, something like work's really stressful, and you've got a really tight deadline, we might understand that might make people feel quite anxious. So we know that it's going to be stressful. So we know with that cognitive empathy, we know that it's going to be stressful because we've got a tight deadline. But the emotional part of it is we know how people might feel in that situation. And when we know how somebody might feel, we can then apply compassionate empathy, which is doing something about that. So that's taking an action. I know that you feel anxious. I'm going to take an action to support that. So that might be in a really stressful deadline where we say, I can't do anything about changing the deadline, but I can do things around your well-being around that. So I can say at the end of that deadline, take half a day off, a day off. I might say, you know, we're going to do some wellness activities around that. Or I might also say that we're also, as a team, we're going to do some reflection about how can we change how we plan for that situation in future. So that's kind of the three broken down. The bit that I think is really important here, and a bit that people might think is quite fluffy actually, and put quite kind of negative language towards it, is the emotional empathy. Because if we talk to them about emotions, everyone sort of starts to go, oh, don't go deep, don't get, you know, that's uncomfortable, don't talk to me about that. But the emotional empathy is super important, because if we recognize how we feel about something, we're likely to understand how someone else might feel about something. And quite often people don't have a very extensive language for their emotions. And there are lots of emotions, there's sort of 200 plus emotions. And I would imagine many people don't have that many to hand that quickly. So I won't test you on that, but if you want to throw a few sort of different emotions into the chat, do feel free to. When we then start to think about that, we also start to recognize about what happens in our body, and how that might impact our wellness in ourselves and in others. And that's not just in terms of our body, in terms of, like, you know, anxiety affects our gut, for example. It might be other things. It might be much more extensive than that. So it might be thinking about kind of anxiety is a trigger that is triggered by stress, by different dynamics between different people. And when we understand that, we can start to apply that compassionate empathy, that understanding of what other people feel and how we can support them. Now, obviously, we're time poor. We can't be running around doing this for everyone all of the time, but it's the quicker that we get at recognizing our own emotional responses to things, the quicker that we get to managing other people's and supporting other people and ourselves and being better. And the more that we understand our own responses, the better that we get at laying boundaries for ourselves that are healthy, that don't create friction or conflict, but create a way of understanding ourselves better and fostering better self-awareness, but also fostering better team collaboration. So we learn empathy through our own life experiences. So everybody kind of interprets empathy in a different way. Who remembers this picture? Anyone? Thumbs up, thumbs down? You can put something in the chat. Who remembers this picture going viral? Yeah. Different perspectives, different colours, different views. I remember this go when it sort of went absolutely crazy. My kids were in school, and it was very divisive, even on the playground. It was such a huge kind of conversation piece. But this is the way that everybody interprets the world, and it's a really good example of the fact that we all have a different view and a different perspective on what we see. Some of us find learning emotions harder. And the reason for that is that some of us aren't able to recognize our emotions. We might feel that we can't communicate that very well. We might not have emotional awareness. Now, that actually it's a myth actually that people with neurodivergent conditions, particularly autism, fit in this bracket. All of us have that. All of us have that. And the reason that all of us have that is that life experiences can impact us differently. So people, for example, who might have had very traumatic experience in life can find it hard to understand emotions. People who have been brought up to not address emotions can also find it hard to understand them. And therefore, their view of it can be very, let's just be pragmatic and crack on. And that can be useful sometimes when we want to survive and we want to sort of win a battle. That's brilliant. But sometimes, and often is the case, when we want to build better relationships in our teams, we want people to understand how those feelings feel and how we can get everyone to collaborate together. So, who's heard of this, the double empathy problem? Anybody? So the double empathy problem was created or was understood by or researched by a man called Dr. Damien Milton. It came out in about 2012. And he challenges the idea that autistic and neurodivergent people lack empathy. And instead, that work kind of highlights that communication breakdowns happen between people when different cognitive experiences occur. So when both sides struggle to understand each other. Quite often with neurodivergency, and particularly in autism, we get this kind of sense that we are led by something else. So often it's anxiety that can lead our responses to sort of shut ourselves away and keep ourselves safe, which can lead to a breakdown in communication. And the reason it matters in empathy and the reason it's really fundamental is that if we understand that somebody's actually feeling anxious or feeling scared or feeling, overwhelmed by something or overstimulated, then they will have different dispositions and different interactions. So if we slow down our thinking and create an environment where we can start to understand where there's a difference, we can start to create a mutual understanding. So that kind of moving towards a space where we can all work together. Now, it is quite challenging, I know, when you're in a really busy team, work is absolutely flat out, and working with differences can be quite a challenge. But something to foster in ourselves and perhaps to understand about ourselves is who in the team is better at that communication, who in the team is better at liaising with others, networking, bringing people forward. People with neurodivergency quite often are really great networkers and they're really great creative thinkers. So are we leaning into strengths? Are we leaning into their strengths and their abilities? Quite often people with neurodivergency, ironically, are really, really empathetic and actually really self-aware. So are we leaning into that? Or are we kind of just sort of going, crack on everybody, let's just be pragmatic? And that's sort of, so that's that in a nutshell. It's quite important piece of understanding, I think, neurodivergency, and perhaps slowing down our thinking, and enabling us to sort of give people respect for their differences, and how we then create a kind of a narrative, I suppose, to sort of move forward. I'm going to get later in this, I'm going to give you some ideas about skills that you can start to foster to help you have those deeper relationships. But one of them that's quite relevant in this space is active listening. So again, thumbs up if you're aware of active listening. Great. Great, that's good to see. How many of you have had active listening training or done any kind of learning yourselves around it? Yeah, great, good, brilliant, lovely to see. Okay, so active listening really helps in situations where you have got difference. Also the other part of active listening is to act without judgment, right? So it's that bit where you're not coming with a pre-concluded decision or thoughts about it. You're actually stepping back and listening openly, and then hearing how you move forward together. So what does it look like? I pinched this image from something that Liz and I did in the summer, so I thought it was quite relevant for the moment. But I think lack of empathy can look like this, can't it? And I'm sure, I'm not going to get you to do a thumbs up, but I'm sure you are aware of micromanagement and those sorts of environments and how it feels. And that can feel quite difficult, can't it? It can feel quite challenging when you know, you're seeing micromanagement or crunch that's not managed very well, or and that kind of leading to that kind of burnout, or losing a team. You know, when you don't have empathy and you don't slow down your thinking and you don't make decisions without judgments, you do make decisions with judgments rather, it can feel really quite cold. It can feel really quite hard as an environment to be in, can't it? And this is what it leads to. It can make, you know, it can make an environment feel incredibly toxic and quite cold, quite difficult, and quite uncomfortable. You don't feel safe to speak up. You don't feel that you can make changes to systems or processes. You don't feel that, you know, even the client's needs are being met, and that you're actually producing a great game. Quite often, you know, empathy is really important in things like UX, right? So if we're not listening, when we're just powering on, we're not making good decisions, and that's where toxicity comes in. So enough about me talking. I'm going to ask you some questions now. Oh, that's colours changed again, just an aside, sorry. I'm going to get to ask you some questions now. I'm mindful that you might not all want to speak, so if you want to put this into the chat, feel free, but it would be great to have a couple of voices. So we're just going to start with a couple of these questions, and I'm not going to go into all of them, but you can feel free to take them away and have a chat afterwards if you want to. I will pass these slides on to Leo, and Leo can share them with you, but obviously if you want to screen grab now, do. So what does empathy look like in a high pressure environment when deadlines are tight and everyone's tired? Do you want to share some reflections there? You can always put it in the chat. What does it feel like in a high pressure environment?
Yeah, I would stick to the chat for now, but absolutely happy to unmute anyone.
Just checking in, yeah. Nice, Florence. Pedro, your question is the relationship between gender, age, and empathy. No, is the short answer. No, there's a really big long answer to this, and that's been researched by scientists that aren't me. But the longer answer to this is that the psychology of humans is where gender differences come in, and we know therefore that women are sort of more are brought up to be more compassionate, generally, not specifically, but that doesn't mean that men don't have this ability. It's more about sort of the world around us. So going back to that question then, what does empathy look like in a high pressure environment? Just checking in and asking how they're feeling. Yeah, anyone else got anything they want to put in there? Considering planning for offering help, yeah. Managing time better, yeah, that's really good. Yeah, yeah. Anything else? Okay. Okay. Extending deadlines, active listening, well done. Um, yeah, yeah. There's also things about kind of recognizing, aren't there? As to Florence sort of said about checking in, recognizing how people feel, recognizing that people are tired. So putting kind of checks and balances in there to support with that. Sometimes it's about saying, I can see that I know we're all really busy. Do you want to go and take yourself off for half an hour and have a little walk or coffee or whatever it might be? It's also recognizing, everyone wears pressure differently, don't they? So we all manage ourselves differently under stress. Some people it will be floods of tears. Some people it will be very short, curt answers. Yeah, getting the balance is really important. But also other people have, different reactions to it. Some people can just be very heads down, get the job done, and don't really want to discuss and communicate. And it's about, when you're looking at that, is about actually removing judgment from different people's responses. Because when we're under high pressure, generally speaking, we're in that kind of fight and flight mechanism. So then it's not a great time to reflect anyway. Later is a better time for reflection. So it's perhaps mindful of just sort of going, I recognize that this is a stressful environment, and now we're just going to look at what we can do to get through that pressure. And then later we're going to do some reflections to see how we can do things differently. Okay, I'm going to move on to a different question, but staying on the top. Where do we think we unintentionally reward low empathy behaviour? Anyone? Do you think we enable it? Do you think that we're all kind of perhaps allow us to become sort of, not victims isn't quite the right word, but sort of that can be subservient? Yeah, complying with unreasonable deadlines. Yeah, competitive environments. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, and unreasonable deadlines, absolutely. And sometimes it's about challenging those deadlines, and that can be hard, can't it? It can be really hard if there's a culture where actually speaking up is also quite difficult, and quite challenging. Do you think that empathy in general, you can give me a thumbs up if you want to. Do you think in general empathy is something that you see in your studios? Do you think it's something that you see reflected as a behaviour? Yeah, good. Good. That's nice to see. It's nice to see. Okay. I would say it's a skill that everyone's learning. I don't think this is just exclusive to games, just to leave that. No games is on the naughty step. I think this is something that everyone's learning. I think particularly generationally, so Pedro, to your question about ages, I think we're getting a better language around this stuff. I think we're getting a better narrative generally around this stuff. And I think we are challenging ourselves to be better at it. But I don't think this is something that everyone's got right. I think it's a journey. Do you think sort of empathy is seen as a strength in this industry? Or do you think it's a weakness? Thumbs up if you think it's a weakness. Nothing. Well, that's good. Neither. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Interesting. What about as a strength? So, do you think that sort of empathy is understood enough to be seen as a strength? Perhaps that's a better way of putting it. No. Okay. Interesting. Do you think perhaps things like sessions like this, because Liz and I, this is like Liz and I did one in the summer and we got some really positive feedback from that. I think, say sessions like this are helping people understand the differences in empathy a little bit more, and therefore that moves those conversations on, perhaps. And let's see. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. Okay. Yes, Lawrence, I think that's a really good point. And I think one point to make there is when you're in a team and you leave empathy to one person in the team, or compassion, or the more sort of softer skills to one person in the team, it unbalances the team, because somebody is always seen as the person who's picking up that skill. And I think it's really important that we all start to understand that we can all foster it. We can all, it's a little bit of self-awareness perhaps, but we can all move towards it, so that it's not just on one person. You know, we've all heard like the studio mum or the studio kind of carer kind of role, and we want to move away from that, because that's not healthy. And particularly when it's on one person. So what's really good to know is to sort of recognize whether we've got it. So is it a strength we've got, and then is it a strength that how do we share that strength? How do we all have it? And how do we all support each other? Yeah, and I think what's important is when you're, depending on where you are in the business, sometimes those people who are in kind of the roles that are perhaps business development, or perhaps finance, or perhaps HR, or perhaps, we all have stress. But leadership itself, a lot of the time those roles are in sort of what we'd call survival mode. So a lot of those times those roles are under pressure to sort of deliver in a very different way to other roles. And so it's about understanding that, because we're in survival mode, we might not really be thinking holistically and compassionately all the time. So it's about how can we embed those into our team environment. So is it a way, some nice actions to do, particularly in relation to empathy and team building, is to recognize when things have gone well. So during a team meeting, for example, is to say, thanks, I really like that contribution you gave. And that really begins to foster that ability to start opening dialogue. So you're starting to open those moments, going, oh, thanks, that was really nice. And then people start to feel that they're valued, and you can start to apply empathy more deeply there. And that's how you can start to foster the development of conversations, particularly with leadership, around kind of these environments aren't necessarily feeling, open to everyone. And I feel like there's quite a lot of judgment. So we'll move on from that to this. What skills help you better apply empathy? So active listening, we've heard of that. Anyone want to add active listening skills to the chat and tell us what they are if you've had them? Yeah, nice, Sylvia, true. So that kind of environment of emotional intelligence is important in studio culture. And interestingly, younger generations are asking for more purpose-led organisations, and that sort of does speak to this some way. So going back to my question, paraphrasing, repeating, understanding, back to speaker. Brilliant, Chelsea. What else does it do? Mirroring and being able to Like, yeah. What are we not doing? No judging, yeah. And no solving. We're not trying to solve the problem, are we? So, okay, that's great. So moving on, one of the things that I think is really common, and again goes back to that kind of fight and flight mechanism a little bit, but also goes back to the culture of just, we're really busy, we've got a job to do, right? And we've got to crack on, is solving. We're always trying to solve a problem, quick problem solving. Well, to be better at empathy is perhaps to not solve, but going back to active listening skills is to ask questions without judgment. But also it's to, when we're talking about active listening, it's to taking ourselves away from waiting for the moment to join in the conversation and taking ourselves into, I'm asking you a question, and hearing this session, you know, these questions, you know, like, how are you feeling today? Because I'm not waiting, clock watching, going, oh, I hope they hurry up and say, because I've got a meeting in 10 minutes. And it's not saying, oh, so you said you got a headache, would you like a paracetamol? It's listening. I'm really sorry you've got a headache. I'm really sorry you're feeling unwell. Is there anything that would help right now? Those are really good and really useful in empathy. Who thinks that they're doing that or could keep doing more of that? Anyone? Or who would like to learn more about how to do that? Okay, well, perspective taking and putting yourself in their shoes. Is that easy? Do we find that easy? Do we find that possible, particularly if we're finding kind of like, you know, there's a challenge with power dynamic perhaps, or there's, you know, we're up against it. Is it always easy? Shut that down. Sometimes it can be quite difficult to understand someone else's perspective, particularly if you're frustrated with them, or particularly if you see something in your a very fixed lens, you know, but I need this widget put wherever, you know, I need the art to look like this because that's what the brief says, and someone else is saying, yeah, but it doesn't look like that, it looks like this. It can be quite difficult, can't it? Um, so yeah, not always fostering, yeah, yeah. What about slowing down and thinking and your thinking and fostering patience? That's really important in fostering better empathy. So sometimes that coming back to that quick to solve someone else's problem, quick to move on, those things can be a real struggle when it comes to empathy. They can be a barrier to empathy because you're just always kind of leading with what you think. Your things. I'm quick solving. I'm quick this. No, and actually that can really inhibit empathy because actually you're not hearing someone else's point of view. You can sometimes gaslight and overlook them. And another one, and I've talked about this earlier, but there's emotional literacy is really important. So for those of you who are interested in this, one person that's really, really good in this space is someone called Susan David. You can look her up, have a good Google of her. Her work is really, really good in terms of sort of opening emotional literacy. The other one is Brené Brown. So you might have heard of Brené Brown, and she talks about vulnerability. She doesn't talk about vulnerability in so much as coming to you and going, oh, you know, I don't know, my grandma's died and I feel really, and I need you to solve how I'm feeling. She means as in saying, my grandma's died and it's making me feel very sad. Would you mind if I took some time out? So it's using that vulnerability and that space and that story to firstly lay boundaries, but secondly, to be brave enough to say, this is my experience. And yes, so they are both powerhouses. There are others, and if you want to find out more, we have a newsletter that we always put our books in about this stuff like we've got a book club, so we always put stuff in there about that stuff. So if you want to sign up to that, feel free to, and then you can find out more about this. That brings me on to understanding boundaries. We talk about boundaries. Who knows what kind of laying boundaries, effective boundaries really means, though? It's quite difficult, a boundary thing, because what, particularly as a line manager, if everyone's saying, well, no, I can't do that. Well, actually, didn't want you to say that's kind of stopping progress, isn't it? So it's about saying, I respect that you find this hard. However, I understand. I hope you understand. We've got to solve this problem together. How can we all work together? And those are really important ways of both recognizing the boundary, but also trying to sort of resolve it and move forward, not to create conflict, not create that breakdown in communication where actually we all end up sort of not moving forward and the team becomes quite toxic quite quickly if that happens. And then finally, questioning, kind of compassionate questioning. So I can see that you're struggling. What would help right now? So that kind of summarizes a lot of this all together. But compassionate questioning is something you can do without even having active listening kind of training, really. It's about, I'm leaning in. I can see it's a hard day for you. I can see that you're, finding things tricky. I don't, and it can be, it's not about like, I've fallen out with someone. It can be like, I can see you're really stressed with that problem you're trying to solve with work. What would help you right now? What can we do? And sometimes, line managers or colleagues, sometimes it's about checking in. I can see that, something's changed in someone's behaviors in your team. What can you do? How can you support each other to get through that more? So those are some really important things that you can sort of take away. So again, these will be shared, but if you want to, take a screen grab right now, feel free to. So I'm going to come to one final bit, and this is some reflections. And I'd like you to try and really kind of get involved, as many as you who can. If you'd rather not put responses into the chat and you'd rather do that through the Q&A where it's anonymous, that's absolutely fine. But I really like to get as few of you as I can, as many of you as I can, involved in these reflections and these thoughts, just so that you've got something to sort of start processing yourselves as you leave, so that you have something to take away. So, my slides. I'm still not great at multitasking. Paul's going to be sitting there going, she's got to get better at this. Right. So who on your team might need a little bit more understanding than they're currently getting? We'll start with that one, and lead you to have a little. I'm going to leave you for a couple of minutes to have a little think about that. Feel free to either share it, and you don't need to share names, just maybe somebody in your, put that into reflection for yourselves. Somebody who might need a little bit more understanding than they're currently getting. And sort of, what could you do? Juniors, nice. Yeah. Perhaps think about why. Why would you say that? Why would they, why do juniors more than anyone else? If you want to share that, feel free to. If you'd rather put that, if you'd rather not, that's absolutely fine, but it would be great for the discussion point. Yeah, yeah, great. I've got my glasses on, so I can actually. Coaching junior staff can take a back seat. Yeah, when you're busy, that's right. Lack of life and industry experience can lead to less resilience. Yeah, that's right. Less coping mechanisms typically. Yeah, typically, not always. Yeah, you're right, Chelsea, there. It could be the first time they've ever dealt with a situation, absolutely. And that mentoring piece is really, really useful, isn't it? And not conducive to learning. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Okay. Okay. Given today, what is there anything that you can do this week to lead more empathetically? Anything that you can take from today that would give you something that you could do more with more empathy, more understanding? What would you change in your approach that would help others? Yeah, great, Paul. Thank you. If someone comes to me with a problem, listen, then ask if they want assistance rather than interject with it, rather than problem solving. Yeah, great. Anything else? Okay. But what about your communication style? What could you adapt to be more empathetic? Is there anything that you think you might be able to adapt in your style? Because it can swing the other way. Sometimes we can be so empathetic, we can be so compassionate, we're actually not thinking about our needs or how our communication style. We can sometimes be almost kind of, too kind, I suppose, to everyone else. And so that's important to foster better boundaries. Um, Show more vulnerability, yeah. Create more emotional connection, yeah. Okay, really good. Thanks, Self. That's great. And we touched on the final one earlier, but do we think we undervalue empathy as a skill? Give me a thumbs up or a heart or an emoji reaction if we think we undervalue it. Brilliant. Okay. All right. So as I come to this, I'm now got to the point where does anyone have any questions that they want to ask of me while we're on this session? Again, you can put it in the Q&A if you'd rather ask anonymously. That's absolutely fine.
I'll I'll jump in, Sarah.
Mm,
You talked about boundaries earlier,
mm.
and I think from, well, maybe speaking from experience, I struggle with sort of setting them, especially given that I don't want to disappoint my team, and I want to sort of do the best job I can. But I've definitely realised that if I don't set any boundaries, I take on too much, and ultimately everything suffers a little bit. So rather than getting to that point, I wondered what the best sort of course of action might be for someone thinking about sort of beginning to set some of those boundaries for themselves.
It's a really good question. It's a question that comes up all the time as well. So I think that's a really strong question. I think there's a few things here. One is to start to understand your own emotional responses to something. And when we talked about emotions earlier, I don't just mean those sort of emotions that people would put in a kind of fluffy sort of, camp or what have you. I mean, actually, when you take on too much, how do you feel? I feel stressed. I feel overwhelmed. I feel like I'm letting my team down. I feel like I'm not successful. So if we flip that around and say, how does it feel when I actually do those things well? So when I put that boundary in place and I say to people, I can't do that right now because I've got all of these things on my plate. But if I do that in a week or two's time, is that okay? We're managing both their expectations, but our own sense of self. And so we're showing ourselves empathy and compassion, by the way, but we're also fostering a really deep culture of saying, I'm managing expectations of others, but also myself. And I'm beginning to practice using those boundaries in that sense, but also being able to say to, your line manager, being vulnerable. So that Brené Brown sort of term of saying, actually, sometimes I need your help to help me recognize that I've got too much on and slow me down. Those can be really good boundaries as well. So can you take something off me, help me take stuff off, or help me manage that dialogue, or back me up when I say I can't do it? Those are really good strategies for helping with boundary setting. By the way, all of this is a skill. So none of this is something I expect anyone to go away and say, brilliant, I'll put that pair of boots and I'll crack that. It doesn't work like that. It's a skill. And the way that the brain works quite literally is once you do this and you do it well, you get reward from it. So once you start to see boundaries being laid successfully, you'll get a reward from it. The brain starts to go, oh, this is happy place. I'll do that again. And I keep building on that. It can become that the boundary is so held so fastidiously, though, that it turns into a negative. So being in that place of self-awareness is recognizing I don't want to be toxic. But if you're saying I'm totally overwhelmed, that's where your line manager could be stepping in and saying, hang on a second, Leo's behavior is not quite right. We need to step in and help. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I think that's a really, really good way of looking at things, and I think, yeah, certainly sort of adapting gradually and everything makes sense. We've had a couple more sort of questions in the chat. I don't know if you want to sort of read them out for everyone, but yeah,
So,
talking
okay.
about sort of, yeah, showing sort of being exercising empathy with people that don't often or might struggle to communicate their own sort of needs, or well, yeah, just aren't communicating effectively themselves, perhaps.
It's again a really good question, and it can be really challenging, this if people don't want to talk about something but you can see that they are struggling. That can be really hard, can't it? Because you want to be able to support someone sometimes. So some tactics that you can try is, sorry, my computer's just told me something. The tactics you can try is how I can see, approaching someone gently. I can see that things aren't, you're not yourself. If you can see that there's some behavior changes, I can see that you're a bit stressed today, or, mate, is everything okay? You seem a bit overwhelmed. That can sometimes open the conversation so we can sort of kind of start to foster kind of a culture of saying it's okay to share. Um, Sometimes that's about taking people out of environments. So for example, it's harder when it's a remote world, but if you're in a team setting, you can see someone's struggling with something. It's about just saying, can I pick this up with you after this call? And sort of just say, I notice these behaviors in you. I just, and by behaviors, by the way, I don't mean I notice these behaviors quite literally. I mean, I noticed today that you were struggling to articulate what you meant. Is everything, is there anything I can help with? If people don't communicate well, generally as a generalization, and you know that as a thing, there are ways you can approach this. You can say, for a team, it's important that we all do communicate clearly. Can we all agree a way and sort of set a contract, as so to speak, between the team? So, I need us all to agree to do X, Y, Z. I need us, and then hold each other to account in a gentle way, no judgment at all. Sometimes it can be really difficult, so there can be different ways to communicate. People might not be able to verbally communicate, but be brilliant at text communication. Some people might find communicating in a group setting really hard, but are much better on reflection. So they're much better outside of the space. And that can be really, really common, particularly when we think about introversion versus extroversion. And again, when we think about neurodivergency, we can see different kind of communication styles. So perhaps sort of looking at how we get a centralized communication together, and also how we recognize some people's strengths in that space. I'm not here to do plugs, but we do strengths profiling, and that can help with this sort of thing more deeply if anyone was interested in that, and that can help you sort of know what your sort of your realized strengths are versus your unrealized strengths, and that can kind of identify things like communication, where it is on a scale, and then that can help you find ways to approach with an empathetic sort of lens on it, how to support people. But there are other mechanisms as well, and there are other things, and you might, if it was someone with neurodivergency, for example, look to get an occupational health report, or put a disability passport in. Or you can even do Safe in Our World self-advocacy training about with human passports. And that's really useful to help find people's communication skills. So that was a big answer to your question, but does that answer your question? Great. Any other questions? And if not, you've got a few minutes of your day back because I finished earlier.
We do have an anonymous question that's just come
Ah,
through.
good quiz.
I don't know if you can see the Q&A
Yeah, I
box.
can.
You can. Okay, fantastic.
Is there? I'm going to read it out. So because that's helpful for people. Is there any advice for line managers on how to know whether to ask more questions or offer advice when one of your reports comes to you with a problem? Is there any advice for line managers on how to know? So do you, I'm assuming by this you sort of mean kind of what's the difference between offering advice or knowing when to sort of dive in with active listening kind of questions. I think active listening is always useful, even before we get to the point of advice, because it fosters safety anyway. But I think what's really useful as well is sometimes you can just offer advice, right? Sometimes you know that, I don't know, yes, you do need to be in that meeting, and it did start 5 minutes ago, that sort of thing. But generally speaking, I think active listening is your biggest superpower here. Asking questions is always useful as a line manager. And understanding more about kind of what people's challenges are is always really, really useful. If somebody comes to you with a direct problem, and depending on whatever the problem is, I suppose, but if it's something like, if it's something, perhaps it's something that's outside of work, there, it's knowing the balance between what you've got through your kind of HR lens, for example. So it could be the occupational health, it could be that it's sort of time off, it could be what have you. But it's also about, God, I hear that that's really hard for you right now. And what would help you? And then it's knowing that you've got that balance of offering advice. If though, it's something to do with work and it's a project to do with work, again, there's a balance, isn't there? Because sometimes you need a quick response to something, and sometimes you just need to give a quick answer. Sometimes it's that they are struggling with another member of the team, and that's when active listening is really, really, really important, because that's when you're starting to understand and fact gather. Hopefully that answered your question. I can see that there's something else. Is there another one in the question chat? Okay. Yes, exactly that, Leah. Sometimes you're helping other people solve the problem themselves. So it's exactly that. What we're trying to do is foster that kind of self-awareness and self-development as well. So that sometimes if we solve the problem for them, we're just sort of we're stifling that self-development and that self-awareness. Okay, fabulous. Is there any other questions before we go? And if not, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Sarah. It's been a really, really interesting discussion, I think. Lots and lots of food for thought.
Thank you.
Certainly a lot to reflect on, I think. Like you say, I think coming away from this and thinking that everything's going to change overnight maybe isn't the right way forward, but certainly a decent amount of reflection and yeah, gradual change.
Yeah, moving in the right direction, learning that, to understand ourselves better is important, and setting ourselves more awareness and more boundaries is really good. It's a work in progress. None of us are perfect at it, even those us that have been doing it a long time. There are things that can help as well. There are wellness things that can help as well. It's recognizing, because there's a balance. If we're always, trying to look after other people and ourselves and stuff, we're not always mentally, we're not always putting ourselves enough wellness into ourselves. Those things can help. Things that can really help with self-awareness, things like journaling, mindfulness, meditation, those can really help. So look out for that sort of thing if that's helpful. But for everyone who's joined today, thank you so much. It was lovely to have you here. I do appreciate you being on this call. I hope you found it useful. And Leo will send the slides out.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again, Sarah. Really, really appreciate it. And thank you again to everyone that's joined.